Okay. So here is my extending my clock. And we can just walk through this again, where we've been given a clock class here, copied and pasted directly from the book source code. We designed this by saying new class, give it the name ext clock, and because that's what the homework said, that's the name of my class. Now, it didn't say what to put in there. In the homework, let's see the description in the homework here was derive the class ext clock and add data member to store the time zone and add the necessary method. So they were kind of foggy on what we needed. So as long as you have an ext clock class defined, you may find you like something else besides just the three things that I thought were important to know about a time zone is its offset from universal time, an abbreviation, and the full name, like Central Standard Time. Now that's something that I just kind of told you, this makes sense. And that's what's going to be happening more and more as you get higher levels. You're not going to be given the full definition of the problem. Maybe on quizzes, because we have to be very careful we define that to test your knowledge. But out there in the real world, it's, hey, I got this problem, please solve it for me, and you have to figure out the solution. So here, they say add a time zone. And I just thought, okay, knowing a little bit about time zones and messing with installing Linux, and every time you do an install, it wants to say, here's what's your time zone, what's your offset. Windows won't do updates unless your time is set correctly sometimes. Those were something that we made up, and we added those methods. This is my constructor. Remember, the public, same name as my class, putting in comments all along the way, especially this comment. You'll find this comment very helpful as you build more methods. It's so easy to get mixed up on where the end of your method is when you want to add a new one. And it's so easy to accidentally add a method right there and things blow up. So in the constructor, I call super, even though I really don't need to, because it's implicit. Implicit means the compiler is doing it for you without you telling it. I'm saying super just to be explicit. Anyone reading this code knows, yes, super is being called. So I am instantiating a clock, and I don't have to worry about what that does. I let the super handle it. I handle what's special about my class. Notice I'm setting my default, because notice the default constructor takes no parameters, and I'm setting its abbreviation, offset, and full name. And so a fairly straightforward default constructor with no parameters. But we want a more useful constructor where I tell it, here's my time zone and abbreviation and time zone name and offset. Hand it that as parameters. Now, does that make sense what I'm doing? Again, super here actually does not get called implicitly as far as I remember. Since this super takes 0 parameters, it calls the default super. Unless there is a super with 3 parameters, which I don't think there is in clock, and I can go check. I think clock, oh yes, it does have an hour, minute, second super. So it may actually get called, but I am calling the default one before I then set my values. And notice actually this is not the same, because notice the parameters here, although I do have 3 parameters, I don't have 3 integers like the clock constructor is. So it's not the same function. Remember, our function is determined not only by the name of it, by exactly the type of every parameter. And since the types of these 3 parameters are not the same, this is like a completely different kind of constructor. It is not overriding the clock constructor that takes 3 integers. So this is a constructor. All it does is give a default started clock with the default settings, and then set my universal time offset, my abbreviation, and my time zone name into my EXT clock. Now we could add more to this, but in the definition it just said add the necessary methods. And so this is sort of functional. It's not, there could be more to be added, but I want to just add a few because I want to get on to the next problem. So we could spend a lot more time refining this, adding taking 6 parameters actually, the hour, minute, second, and then offset, abbreviation, and time zone name. But we'll just go ahead with, I'll put a comment in here, default clock constructor, no params. We'll be lazy and not call the clock constructor that takes 3 parameters because I want to get to the toString method. And I think clock has a toString. Let me check to see if clock has a toString. I think we were looking last time. I was thinking it did, but then as I looked here, clock does not have a toString method. I don't know why that's jittery like that. I'll grab this instead. It does not have a toString method, but toString works. You remember why? Remember there's a built-in parent of every object in Java. And the built-in object has a default toString that simply gives the name of the object and the memory address of the object. So the default toString is built into every parent, the default object parent of every object in Java. It's the default parent of every class, because a class is an object in Java. So I added to this, get my hours, put a colon in between, get the minutes, colon in between, get the seconds, and then a space. Maybe I'll make that a dash instead. And then the time zone abbreviation. So this will, if it's working, should generate hour, minute, seconds from whatever the default constructor sets it to be with a dash time zone abbreviation. Now stop me if you have any questions about any of this. I'm just going to make this look a little better. I'll put that on 3 separate lines since I already split it up. I like the look of that a little better. Yes? I'll think about that because I want you to do most of this, because part of it writing it down yourself helps you remember it. I might put that up there after assignment's done, just so you can review it. But remember, I'm not being super fussy. You don't have to have this exact code. As long as the code works, you can add your own. Because remember, the definition of the problem was write definition and methods to make it functional. And functional is kind of a foggy term. So you don't have to have exactly my code. But right there? I'm in the chapter 10. Which one? I'm not clear which one you want. Here's the definition of my extended clock. Here's clock. This is what came from the chapter that we just copy pasted. Didn't do any changing of this code. This guy here, this is our main. Okay. Okay, this is what actually will then test the code. So some of this is from problem number 2 that we're going to be looking at in a second. Here is the testing of it. All I do for testing it is Okay, I'm just printing out, here's my chapter 10 homework. I define my clock as a new AXT clock because that's my new extended clock. So I'm defining a variable of that type. Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is basically, I'll leave that up there. This is basically testing the code. It's a really basic, not complicated test at all. Only exercising the code. I would call this just a super does it run. As you write something even more meaningful, you'll have much more meaningful tests. But this is a simple test. I create a clock, and then I have it do its 2-string. Just to see 2-string works, it does get created without runtime error. All right, let's see what we've got here. Oh, because you don't have you need to have also the default constructor. You need both of those. Remember, I didn't replace back here in ext clock. What's happening is you're getting an error right here because you're expecting a clock without parameters. Or you added the parameters here. But back in your definition of your clock, do you still have that in there? See how this has two constructors now. It has one without parameters, and it has a constructor with parameters. Do you have those both? No. Okay. So what this means is I can create a clock without any parameters, like I did right here. New clock, new ext clock, no parameters. But I also have an ext clock that takes parameters. And it's probably a good idea to test that one as well. So to test the one with and without parameters, I can go back to my main, and let's test the constructor with parameters. Test constructor with parameters. And again, it's an ext clock, and I'll call it my clock 2 equals new ext clock. This time, to test the one that takes parameters, I'm trying to remember what it was universal time offset -6. The abbreviation is Central Standard Time, and the name I'm going to put on a separate line to make it nice and readable for you. The name is Central Standard Time. This is basically exercising the second constructor that takes 3 parameters. Let me put that a little more readable here. How about this? Just make it more readable. There's the 3 parameters that the second constructor takes. And now to test that one, we'll just copy paste this one and print him out as well. And I'll print my clock 2. Now actually, I think my default made it Central Standard Time, so let's make it a different one. Let's make it Eastern Standard Time, because the default is Central Standard Time. This is my testing of the code. Very simple, just create a clock, print out what it has. Because clocks aren't that exciting. Now to run it, let's see if I actually get an output. I don't get it, at this point I don't have any red in any of my code files, so I know I don't have compile errors. Let's run it, see if I get any runtime error. And if I look at my console, I get my 2 clocks. Since I use the default constructor that gives them 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, they're boring 000 dash, the abbreviated time zone. So you good with that? Or are you getting any errors?
No. It's a whole not clock too, but it's just not being used.
Oh yeah, when it's not being used, that's because you haven't done this yet. Don't worry about the not used errors, but that is a warning. It's just telling you, hey, by the way, why did you create this variable? You're not doing anything with it. But usually you can still run because you're intending to do more. And that's a very good thing. You write your code, run, write, run, keep doing that cycle. Don't wait to the very end to run it and find runtime errors. Test it along the way. So any questions about that? Now I want to go down to the next problem now, which has us working with a, well, let's check it out. I'm going to get this right. Working with a date class. They also, in this chapter, they gave us a date class. So that date code I can find in chapter 10, source code. And it was towards the end, if I remember right. Where was my date? Or maybe it was towards the beginning. Let's see here. Composition. There. Right at the very first folder of chapter 1, there's a date.java. So I opened that and I copy-pasted it into my code, creating this. So go ahead and open that date.java, copy the code and paste it. I don't make any changes to this code. I'm going to extend date to practice this whole subclass concept. So here's the date code described in the chapter, but we can walk through it here as we have the code with us. Yeah.
Can you reopen chapter 9? Because you think that recommendation of it is 825 to where you set that message out?
Yeah, it is in the class in the schedule, but I'm realizing that people watch the Moodle dates on things more than my class schedule time. So I'm going to update the Moodle dates. Yeah, I can do that. I'll give you more time on the quiz 9. I almost fell off my chair. Saw most of you hadn't even done your chapter 9 quiz. But I'll be bugging you more, reminding you. And I'll put the date on Moodle too. You notice there's more dates there. Yes. Right. Yep. Yeah, I'm learning that. It's just a pain for me because I have my Excel sheet keeping track to myself of what dates are. But I have to go one by one and click 1,000 times to set the dates on each assignment. Out at NICC, their system, you can bring up all your assignments on a spreadsheet and say, okay, here's my due dates. So much easier. Maybe someone will write an import from my Excel sheet, map the due dates, synchronize them. But it's a little painful now, but I'll do that. Bug me if you don't see a due date on something. Okay, so the class date, they want us to extend this. And how do they want us to extend it? They want us to...
What folder was that?
Oh, that was in the composition folder, the very first one. What they want us to do is override the set date method. All right, so let's look at the date. Here's our class date defined for us, where it has 3 integers defining our month, day, and year. Here's the default constructor without any parameters. Assigns the default date of January 1st, 1900, which I think is actually the year 0 for the Gregorian count. Well, no, I think for default PCs. If you give a clock 0, I think that's the date shows up. Here is the constructor that takes 3 parameters, and this is the one that we are going to override. We're not going to change the definition and date because 10 other programs are using this definition and we don't want to break their programs. We're going to override it in our version. So, what's that? Where's it found? Over here, it's in the Chapter 10 source code, composition folder. Yeah. Chapter 10 and composition, and it's one of the first things they have in Chapter 10, and there's the source code for it. And there's the person, they discuss these various classes. So copy paste that, and then we walk through that. And I don't want to go too long here because I want to give you a chance for your quiz. And here then is the constructor. This is the one that we care about. We're going to override the constructor that takes 3 integer parameters. Okay? Now, did they give us the name to call it? I guess I told you to call it date2. Yeah. Date2 is the name of the class. So you've been specified what the name of the class is. So create a new class called date2 in Eclipse. And remember how to create a class. Just do File, New, Class. File, New, Class, and then give it the name date2. And I've done that already. Let me just, new class, you get this. And all you say here is the name of your class. It creates a file with that exact name. And so here is date2. Yes? I think you can, yeah, to rename it, you can right-click, refactor. And it'll make sure all references to that file get corrected. So the right-click, refactor. Same thing with variables. If you want to rename a variable that's been used all over the place, it has a nice feature. You can rename a variable. It will make sure all occurrences of that variable get changed properly. That's called the refactoring. So you can do that with files as well. Okay, so in date2, we have to rewrite this function. This is our constructor for the date2. Because we are extending date and it's a constructor, I want to modify this to validate the day, month, and year that they've given me. Now, in date, here's their definition. They simply take what month was given as a variable, day and year, and assign it to the members, private members, month, day, year. Well, in my version, since I don't have access to the parent's month, day, year, because notice in the parent class date, they are private, I can only use the set date, or set month, set day, set year, when I'm actually going to implement setting the date. So I have done nothing yet for setting the date, because I want to, first of all, validate the day, month, and year. So first thing I do is define my constructor that takes 3 parameters. And I'm not going to call super day, month, and year yet. I'm going to validate it and then call actually, I'm just going to do I think I can do this. I'm going to validate it, and then I think I can do this. Super day, month, year. I can, first, before I call super though, I want to validate the day, month, and year. So here's my plan. I'm defining my constructor that will first validate day, month, and year. And if it's valid, then call the super, because it handles setting the day, month, and year. I suppose I could call separately set date, set month, set year. But if super does it for me, I don't have to do anything else. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we have to think about, what do you mean by validating a date? Yeah. Yep. Now, so I could think about this. If I want to write it all myself, how would you do this? Well, for month, you could just make sure month is greater than 0, less than 13. Greater than or equal to 1, less than or equal to 12. Month can only be from 1 to 12. Year, oh, what would we do for validating the year? Yeah, so we might say, okay, it has to be greater than 1900, less than 2500. Computers will be thinking for themselves by then. So,
is the number of lines to like just 4.
Reduce the number of lines. Oh yeah, the number of digits. Limited to 4 digits. Yeah, so you could say it's greater than 1900, less than 2500. That would make 4 digits. Won't even go up to 9,999. But then the problem is the days of the month. How do we handle what the valid days of the month would be? Well, 30 days in September, April, June, and November. The rest of 31. February can have 28, except on leap years. And the logic starts to kind of blow up on us. There you go. You could just say, okay, month 1 to 12, day 1 to 31. And if they have to put February 31st, we'll say, well, you were close. Or if we want to be exact, we could let somebody else do the work, which is the approach that I decided to take. In validating a date, I created a function called isValidDate. And I had to make it, as I was working on it, the compiler forced me to make it public static Boolean. And look what I did. Rather than try to figure out 1 to 12, 1900 to 2500, I figured, is there something in the system that will figure out the date and see if it parses as a legal date? Here is my test right here. Date is valid if this is a new function I created. Yeah, it's inside the public class, right? It's after the constructor. At the end of the constructor, I add a function called isValidDate. Can decipher it, or can parse it. Now, how do you think I found this answer? Oh, look, I put it in my comments. I just did a search, Java valid date, and Stack Overflow, or actually this wasn't Stack Overflow, which is usually where I find answers. Here I came across a site that it was fairly understandable that, oh, here's how to get the system to check whether you have a valid date. And in the code that I found, it showed an example of, okay, you have to put your date in some, or tell the system, I'm giving you a date in some kind of format, 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. Set this lenient to be false, so make it strict date format. Create a string that was in that format. That's what this is doing. And why don't I put a comment there? Create a date string in proper format. And I think what I'll do for this one, I'll give you this code as well, because this is rather complicated code, and I want to give you time for the quiz here. So see what I did. And the basic thing I want you to get here is, rather than me designing all the limits, I looked for answers online, which is legal to do, because it takes some work to figure out and understand. Some people write horrible code online, and you can't figure out what were they trying to explain here. They give you one snippet, and the rest is verbiage that's a different language, and they expect you to understand it. But it's a challenge to you. After a while, you actually will start understanding that foreign language. Hopefully not writing it yourself for other people not to understand. So what I did is found a way to format a date and let the system try to parse it as a date. And if it does come out as a valid date, it will not cause an exception. So I can do a try catch, and if it doesn't parse in the catch part, I figure, oh, okay, it must be an invalid date. I return false in my isValid. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'll post this code for you, and we'll talk about it Friday. But I want you to get plenty of time on this quiz. Say about 10 answers, but one is a small piece of snippet of code. I will now make it visible to you. This basically is just simply reviewing arrays, questions, and that's why I sent the email out last night. Is I have all the questions are from there except for one little essay question, and it's a short essay question, so don't panic. Where's my change settings? There we go. Oh, I could have done it a different way. Appearance. Oh. There it is. Show. And save. Okay. So it's called, go refresh on the page if you don't see that there. It's a quiz over arrays. Quiz arrays. Underneath the assessment section. One attempt allowed. And when you're done, you can leave. I'll stick around in case you want to work on that problem some more and help you. And I'll stop the recording.